Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts is not a well-known campus by any means, and the few scholarly visitors who come there are an odd lot, drawn usually by the strange collection of occult books given to the Miskatonic Library by the late Dr. Henry Armitage. Miss Doris Horace, the librarian, had never seen quite such a strange visitor, though, as this professor, J.D. Mallison, who claimed to come from Dayton, Ohio, but spoke with an unmistakable New York accent. Considering his furtiveness, she found it no surprise that he spent the whole day, June the 26th, 1969, poring over the rare copy of Dr. John Dee's translation of the Necronomicon of Abdul al-Hatzred. That was the book most of the queer ones went for. That, or the Book of Sacred Magick of Abramelin the Mage. Doris didn't like the Necronomicon, although she considered herself an emancipated and free-thinking young woman. There was something sinister, or to be downright honest about it, perverted about that book, and not in a nice, exciting way, but in a sick and frightening way. All those strange illustrations, always with 5-sided borders, just like the Pentagon in Washington. But with these people inside doing all these freaky sex acts with these other creatures who weren't people at all. It was, frankly, Doris's opinion that old Abdul al-Hatzred had been smoking some pretty bad grass when he dreamed up those things. Or maybe it was something stronger than grass. She remembered one sentence from the text. Only those who have eaten a certain alkaloid herb, whose name it were wise not to disclose to the unilluminated, may in the fleshy see a shoggoth. I wonder what a shoggoth is, Doris thought idly. Probably one of those disgusting creatures that the people in the illustrations are doing those horny things with. Ugh! She was glad when J.D. Mallison finally left and she could return the Necronomicon to its position on the closed shelves. She remembered the brief biography of crazy old Abdul al-Hatzred that Dr. Armitage had written and also given to the library. Spent 7 years in the desert and claimed to have visited Irem, the city forbidden in the Koran, which al-Hatzred asserted was of pre-human origin. Silly. Who was around to build cities before there were people? Those shoggoths? And in different Muslim, he worshipped beings whom he called Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu. And that insidious line, according to contemporary historians, al-Hatzred's death was both tragic and bizarre, since it was asserted that he was eaten alive by an invisible monster in the middle of the marketplace. Dr. Armitage had been such a nice old man, Doris remembered, even if his talk about Kabbalistic numbers and Masonic symbols was a little peculiar at times. Why would he collect such icky books by creepy people? he asked.
Do you have to fly back to New York today? Can you possibly stay over a night? I got something I'd like you to see. It's time we started reaching people in your generation and really showing you instead of just telling you. Are you game?
And Joe Magick, ex-Trotskyist, ex-engineering student, ex-liberal, ex-Catholic, heard himself saying,
Yes.
And heard a louder voice, unspeaking, uttering a more profound,
Yes.
Deep inside himself, he was game. For astrology, for I Ching, for LSD, for demons, for whatever Simon had to offer as an alternative to the world of sane and rational men, who were sanely and rationally plotting their course toward what could only be the annihilation of the planet. We shall not be moved.
God is dead,
the priest chanted.
God is dead,
the congregation repeated in chorus.
God is dead. We are all absolutely free,
the priest intoned more rhythmically.
God is dead,
the congregation picked up the almost hypnotic beat.
We are all absolutely free.
Joe shifted nervously in his chair. The blasphemy was exhilarating, but also strangely disturbing. He wondered how much fear of hell still lingered in the back corridors of his skull, left over from his Catholic boyhood. They were in an elegant apartment high above Lakeshore Drive.
We always meet here,
Simon had explained,
because of the acrostic significance of the street name.
And the sounds of the automobile traffic far below mingled strangely with the preparations for what Joe already guessed was a black mass.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law,
the priest chanted. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, Joe repeated with the rest of the congregation. The priest, who was the only one who had not removed his clothes before the beginning of the ceremony, was a slightly red-faced middle-aged man in a Roman collar, and part of Joe's discomfort derived from the fact that he looked so much like every Catholic priest he had known in his childhood. It had not helped matters that he had given his name, when Simon introduced Joe to him, as Padre Pederastia, which he pronounced with a very campy inflection, looking flirtatiously directly in Joe's eyes. The congregation divided, in Joe's mind, into two easily distinguishable groups. Poor full-time hippies from the Old Town area, and rich part-time hippies from Lakeshore Drive itself, and no doubt also from the local advertising agencies on Michigan Avenue. There were only 11 of them, however, including Joe, and Padre Pederastia made 12. Where was the traditional 13th?
Prepare the pentad,
Padre Pederastia commanded. Simon and a rather good-looking young female, both quite unself-conscious in their nakedness, arose and left the group, walking toward the door which Joe had assumed led to the bedroom area. They stopped to take some chalk from a table on which hashish and sandalwood incense were burning in a goat's head taper, then squatted to draw a large pentagon on the blood-red rug. A triangle was then added to each side of the pentagon, forming a star, the special kind of star Joe knew, which was known as pentagram, symbol of werewolves and also of demons. He found himself remembering the corny old poem from the Lon Chaney Jr. movies, but it suddenly didn't sound like kitsch anymore. Even the man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night can turn to a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
I-O,
the priest chanted raptly.
I-O,
the chorus came.
I-O, E-O, Evo-A.
The chant rose weirdly.
I-O, E-O, Evo-A.
The rhythmic reply came in cadence. Joe felt a strange, ashy, acrid taste gathering in his mouth, and a coldness creeping into his toes and fingers. The air, too, seemed suddenly greasy and unpleasantly, mucidly moist.
I-O, E-O, Evo-A, he!
The priest screamed in fear or in ecstasy.
I-O, E-O, Evo-A, he!
Joe heard himself joining the others. Was it imagination, or were all their voices subtly changing in a bestial and pongoid fashion?
All sonuf va-ore-saji,
The priest said more softly.
All sonuf va-ore-si-saji.
They chorused.
It is accomplished.
The priest said.
We may pass the guardian.
The congregation arose and moved toward the door. Each person, Joe noticed, was careful to step into the pentagram and pause there a moment, gathering strength before actually approaching the door. When it was his turn, he discovered why. The carving on the door, which had seemed merely obscene and ghoulish from across the room, was more disturbing when you were closer to it. It was not easy to convince yourself that those eyes were just a trick of trompe l'oeil. The mind insisted on feeling that they very definitely looked at you, and not affectionately, as you passed. This thing was the guardian, which had to be pacified before they could enter the next room. Joe's fingers and toes were definitely freezing, and autosuggestion didn't seem a very plausible explanation. He seriously wondered about the possibility of frostbite. But then he stepped into the pentagram, and the cold suddenly decreased. The eyes of the guardian were less menacing, and a feeling of renewed energy flowed through his body, such as he had experienced in a sensitivity training session after he had been cajoled by the leader into unleashing a great deal of pent-up anxiety and rage by kicking, screaming, weeping and cursing. He passed the guardian easily and entered the room where the real action would occur. It was as if he had left the 20th century. The furnishings and the very architecture were Hebraic, Arabic, and medieval European, all mixed together in a most disorienting way, and entirely unrelieved by any trace of the modern or functional. A black draped altar stood in the centre, and upon it lay the 13th member of the coven. She was a woman with red hair and green eyes, the traits which Satan supposedly relished most in mortal females. There had been a time, Joe remembered, when any woman having those features was automatically suspected of witchcraft. She was, of course, naked, and her body would be the medium through which this strange sacrament would be attempted. What am I doing here? Joe thought frantically. Why don't I leave these lunatics and get back to the world I know? The world where all the horrors are, after all, merely human. But he knew the answer.